welcome everybody to another episode of The Possible Human, where we're exploring human possibility of what we can become. And today I'm really happy and delighted to have my friend Dawson Church here. Dawson is an author, publisher, scientist, researcher, and general great guy. He's the author of Genie in the Genes, Healing the Heart of the World, The Soul of Medicine, and probably about 8 or 10 other books. I can't even keep track of them all. Dawson, it's a real delight to have you here. Thank you so much for coming aboard.
Yeah, one guy introduced me a while back and said, I hate it when people have written more books than I've read.
Oh, that's terrible. You know, the story was somebody gave me a book for Christmas, and I thought that was really nice, except I already had one. What's the point of having two? I mean, really, you know? So
it's like the little boy who got back from his first day at school, and I know this isn't the agenda, but it's just too funny. And he'd been so excited about going to the first day of school, but when his mom picked him up after school, the little boy looked so dejected. And she said, honey, what's the problem? He said, they told me I have to go back tomorrow.
Well, to be honest, when I was growing up, I really felt school was a prison. I was forced to sit in a chair to listen to a crazy woman talk to me about boring things. I was fascinated by life. I wanted to learn, but I didn't want to have to be regimented and have to sit still and to be quiet and to have to learn that incredibly boring stuff they called my education.
I'll do the audience specs over here. So I'll do the...
Thank you. I needed the visuals to go along with that. You know, there's this thing called the Sudbury schools, where they have the philosophy that you don't learn somebody anything. What did the teacher say in this class? In Long Island, they say, in this class, I'm going to learn you the words. You're going to learn the words because I'm going to learn you the words. But the thing is all learning is self-learning. It's self-motivation. So they have a philosophy that if a child doesn't want to learn anything and he wants to go out fishing, have a great day. But when that child is 10, 11, 12 and the parent's getting all worried the child doesn't know how to read, he comes in one day and he says, I want to put together this model, but I can't read the instructions. Well, great, come on in. Let's teach you how to. And he learns to read in months on his age level. And they never lost their passion for learning. And I think that's so important because so many of the people today have just lost their passion.
You know, we are learning machines. Our bodies are learning machines. Our cells are learning machines. But our psyches are learning machines. You know, one of the amazing pieces of research done in the I guess the early part of the century was when they looked at the parts of the brain responsible for memory and learning in people in their 80s. People in their 80s,
yes.
In their 80s, when they were taught new skills, were generating all kinds of new synaptic connections in their brains. And so we're literally hardwired to learn, to appreciate, to respond to novelty. But as far as school goes, I agree with you. One great sage said, the genius of our schools is we figured out a way to take children's innate passion for learning and crush it out of them. I mean, how do we do that in schools?
I couldn't agree more. It is incredible to me that you can actually take the world and make it boring. History is so alive. All the subjects are so alive. And when you finally get one good teacher and you go, wow, that's what school could be. It can be this incredibly passionate, interesting place where we can learn and grow.
You know, one of the things that I did last year, which really struck me, was I went to a mandala drawing class with my partner, Christine. And Christine's an art teacher, and she teaches 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds art. So whenever I go to her classroom, she's just so loving and so inspirational and so good at, loves teaching art. So she just says to the kids, we're going to draw a pirate ship today. We're going to make a model of a frog.
Yes.
And they just dive in there. They grab the pens and papers. They start to create away like crazy. We have all these photographs on her website of people holding up their artworks after they're done, grinning from ear to ear. They've had this explosion of creativity. You can't even can hold them back. They're so into it.
You can't hold an excited child back.
No, you can't. But we then went to this mandala drawing workshop and sat there as, again, the two of us were there, fantastic workshop, brilliant teacher. But we then heard all the adults of the class, who were mostly in their 50s and 60s, just say things like, oh, I'm no good with color. I don't think I can finish this in the time we have available, and I won't be able to finish it without the teacher. I've just never been that good with, these kinds of constrained designs of the mandala. I don't know if I can do that. Or I can't think of anything to put in my mandala. And we sat there, Richard. It was like a psychotherapy group. It was like such a sad experience. My heart just went out to you. I thought, you poor people, what happened to you between the age of 5 and the age of 55 that crushed that innate thrill of learning and just pouring creativity into the world, crushed it out of you? What can we do to restore you? And of course, that's the question for us today. With health, with enthusiasm, with life, with loving, we've had so much crushed out of us. And I think our central reason you do what you do, I do what I do, many of us do what we do, is we so long to see that core love for life restored to people. They deserve that. We were born with it. Whatever got in the way of it, whatever crushed it out of us, we need to heal that so we can get back to that early state.
That's exactly what I'm all about in this work, in your work, to bring that life force back in our lives, because that's really what got missing. It really comes down to the magic.
Yes.
Because the creativity is the magic, the love, the joy, the passion, the enthusiasm. That's the magic of living.
Yeah.
And it seems that all the institutions have been designed to destroy the thing they supposedly, the justice system destroys justice, the educational system destroys education, and the medical industry destroys health, and it goes on and on, that each one is doing the very thing purported to not do.
But also internally, we're doing that to ourselves. So there are these systems that reinforce that and externalize that, but our own internal self-talks, like we heard the self-talk from people when we were growing up that said, oh, you can't do that. People in our family don't do that.
Right.
Women don't do that. Men can't do that. You're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too thin, blah, blah, blah. And so we hear these messages growing up. We then internalize those voices. And so like I'm working with people sometimes in my live workshops, and they'll give me this piece of self-talk, like I don't deserve, I don't belong, I'm not good enough, and so on. I'll say, well, who told you that? They'll say, well, I got that message from my aunt Agatha, when I was 3 or 4 or 5. And I'll say, well, where's Aunt Agatha now? And they'll say, well, she's dead. I'll say, okay, she's dead, but her voice is living there in your head. You have your own internal Aunt Agatha now oppressing you, even though she's dead. It's time to let her go out of your own head, rather than carry it forward.
It's just like the way they train an elephant. They put a great big chain on the baby elephant so it doesn't try to move, and then they eventually put a small rope on its leg with a stake in the ground, and the elephant knows that it can't go anywhere, so it doesn't try anymore. And so people have become conditioned to not try, and that's partly what we're both about, is helping people wake up. So why don't you kind of tell people what kind of work you've been doing with the EFT and how you got into it, and I'd love to explore that more.
I also want to talk about how it relates to quantum touch and what you do.
Well, that's where we're going to go with it, because I'll just give you a preview of coming attractions. I just learned last week that some of my advanced instructors are having incredible success with bipolar, addictions, Parkinson's, autism, and a wide range of things that I really didn't think we could get to very deeply. This is just so mind-blowing. And I interviewed a couple of them who were talking these crazy stories that people wouldn't generally believe, but they just had one after another after another. And I'm sure there were some of their most successful cases, but is across the board. They're surprised when it doesn't happen as opposed to surprised when it does. So yeah, we're going to go back to all that stuff, and because that's really part of the whole exploration. But I think it would be great to bring people up to speed with who you are and what you've been doing.
Well, again, my name is Dawson Church, and my most well-known book is called The Genie in Your Genes. And it very much picks up where my friend Bruce Lipton left off with the biology of belief. And then it talks about epigenetics, the control of genes from outside the cell, outside the body even. So there's an environment outside of our cells, outside of our bodies. And that environment is switching genes on and off all the time. Very simple example, when you get scared, when you have a negative reaction to someone or something, your body takes that fear, that emotional signal, and turns it into a biochemical signal. So, for example, your levels of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol go up. But the reason you make more cortisol when you're stressed or afraid is that the signal is going from that stressful event or that stressful thought to your adrenal cortex above your kidneys and turning on the genes there that code for that complex protein molecule of cortisol. You then make more cortisol. So that's how a thought becomes biochemistry in your body. And I've been really interested in this whole field. So I was in book publishing most of my professional career, but after a while, Richard, I thought I'm going to move from publishing to reporting, and then from reporting to advocacy. I'm just a real advocate for energy therapies now, because we need them and they work, and conventional medicine's fantastic at things like surgery, at things like really targeted biological interventions, at infectious diseases. I mean, modern medicine has just some huge benefits for us, but it's really bad at certain things like autoimmune conditions. I mean, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, a whole host, rheumatoid arthritis, all these things that modern medicine really struggles with and isn't able to cure in the same way that we cured polio or typhoid or all those earlier kinds of problems. So I've been really focused now on bringing energy therapies into the mainstream, into hospitals. I love individual therapists. I love individual practitioners who have maybe a home health practice or a small group health practice.
Right.
But where the people are is in Kaiser Permanente, in Sutter Health, in St. Joseph's Healthcare, in the Veterans Administration. So I want to see these energy therapies there where the people are, and that's my big focus, is institutional adoption of energy medicine.
Well, you told me you did, 50 studies with EFT? 50 documented studies. Why don't you tell us what happened there?
Well, first of all, I had to go back to school and get my doctorate, because I quit in the middle of my doctorate and never finished it. So I thought, who's going to do this work? I couldn't find anybody who would do it. There was all this mythology about how hard it was to do research, and we wouldn't be able to do the research. You needed all this funding to do research. Where's the funding? There are no donors. Blah, 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 blah. And so, not believing all of that, I just went back to school, finished my doctorate, and then plunged into research. And I picked EFT, emotional freedom techniques, or tapping, to research initially because it's really, really, really easy to do.
Yes.
The instructions for EFT are in the back of my book, The Genie in Your Genes, and they're one page. I joke sometimes, I have 400 scientific references in 350 pages in the book just to get you to do a little bit, one page of real work on yourself. So I picked EFT because it has a lot of people worldwide who use it. We did a little project looking at Google searches in June. And in July, we looked back the month of June 2013. We said, how many people searched for terms like EFT tapping, tapping therapy, and so on? And the number that came back was astonishing. 9.3 million people worldwide in the month of June of 2013 searched for terms like EFT tapping, EFT therapy, and similar terms. They were searching from Zimbabwe. They were searching from China, from Korea.
Right.
They were searching from all over the world. Yeah. So I picked EFT because it has this huge number of people who use it, and it's super simple to learn. But what then happens is people learn EFT, see it's useful, but maybe it doesn't work for this client or that case or that problem. Maybe they take a class in quantum touch, or they take a class in energy medicine, or they take a class in therapeutic touch. They do something else because they realize that if they have 4 or 5 or 6 tools, they can really make progress with every client. So, so I've really been focused on EFT initially, but as a gateway drug. A gateway drug.
A gateway modality.
A gateway modality, yes. Let's be clean and sober over here. So a gateway modality into this whole world of energy medicine. And when you have a lot of skills in this field as a practitioner, as you were saying earlier, you can do amazing things with your clients.
Well, it always seems to me that real therapies can synergistically work with each other, while destructive therapies will synergistically destroy people. What do they say? About 100,000 people are killed from physician error, drug combinations, and other such things. If it was a foreign terrorist doing that, we would go to war. If 100,000 citizens were killed by a foreign enemy, but as our friendly neighborhood doctor and druggist, just say no to drugs, I say, but do it, it's considered normal. This is just business as usual. And so
we tolerate deaths and disabilities, the result of the medical system, far more than we do about other kinds of things. For example, obviously we need standards and we need safety measures in place for all kinds of supplements as well. But for example, when there's a bad batch of tryptophan that came across from Japan, it was just basically banned, and that was the end of tryptophan availability from one death or one serious adverse event due to an infected batch.
And now we get rid of the whole thing altogether because they didn't want it in the first place.
Whereas we're so willing to tolerate egregious errors. I mean, hospitals are, you want to get an infection, go to a hospital. That's where you'll find one. Probably an antibiotic-resistant infection, because that's where we
breed them.
Our hospitals are petri dishes where we culture these things.
Yes.
So we have this crazy system. I was just looking in the New York Times. They ran an op-ed piece called "American Medicine in 10 Graphs," and graphically they showed what's wrong with the system. One was the cost of healthcare in the U.S. compared to every other country, more than double the cost in England or in France or in Germany or Japan, more than triple the cost in New Zealand, which has a superb healthcare system. So huge amount of money being spent, double the amount of anyone else. What is it buying us? It's buying us worse infant mortality numbers than most of those other countries, shorter lifespans, so significantly shorter lifespans in the US than most of those countries, and many more hospital deaths, all hospital infections, all kinds of bad measures on which we managed to spend more than double what the average industrialized country spends. So we somehow tolerate this. It's astonishing to me. And when it comes to so-called alternative medicine, we're all over it when there's any kind of small, potential problem. And with energy medicine, you really look hard to find any accounts of adverse events. With EFT, the worst thing that can happen is you'll start to really feel all those emotions you've been suppressing for the last 30 or 40, 50 years. That's going to be hard to deal with all those emotions, but it's not going to be fatal. You'll feel those emotions, you'll tap, and you release those emotions. And when you release them, suddenly you're a lot lighter and a lot more prone to health.
Exactly.
So, it's a conundrum, and I'm just astonished we don't do more to encourage these methods, adopt them faster, and have the same kind of level playing field for alternative medicine we have for conventional medicine.
Well, it's not going to be a level playing field as long as people have their money, their careers, and their reputations and their egos tied up in saying, I don't see what you're talking about. What you're talking about can't possibly be true. They're hostile, prejudiced, and bigoted against solutions that don't fit their model.
Well, I think what it is I think it's disbelief, because the results are so good. If I have a new Honda, it's a really nice Honda, and if I told you that my new Honda gets 65 miles a gallon, you'd probably be really impressed. But if I told you my Honda gets 200 miles a gallon,
I would find that hard to believe.
You would find it hard to believe. So you hear things from practitioners, and you find them hard to believe. I hear things like, I make a fool of myself often by saying, I don't think EFT will work for XYZ.
Yes.
I say, I don't think EFT can work for dissociation, for borderline personality disorder, for several severe psychopathologies like that. But
Yeah.
I go on my own website, and EFT Universe, look up borderline personality disorder, and you find people who've used it either as therapists or as individuals, severe dissociation, schizophrenia, all kinds of problems which I thought were incurable. I mean, we couldn't touch with these energy therapies, but people do get better from them. Now, I want to say that those are the exception, not the rule. Like, there are some conditions where there are occasional reports of success, but many more of failure. But again, the worst thing that can happen is you shift some emotions, shift some energy, and you feel better. That's really the ultimate bad side effect from this. Whereas the positive side effects are fantastic. The joy,
we
the
don't
liberation.
know of bad side effects because we're doing something completely non-invasive or destructive, so it doesn't attract bad side effects. Now, I've been hearing from my instructors who are doing a lot more sessions than me. I'm more of the researcher and explorer than the practitioner myself. But I'm hearing that when they learned the level 2 quantum touch, all of a sudden it gave them the capacity to work on mental conditions that they never really could access before. And they're working inside people's brains on a direct level. And this is just my sense of things, but I'm about 97% positive this is true. The more surrendered the practitioner is in their heart, in their love, in the sense of giving and caring, the faster and more effective the work. So that's part of the reason psychopaths aren't drawn to my work. But on a deeper level, I'm wondering, I really think we have a scale here of where the miracles happen most profoundly, most commonly, most often, is when the person is just going into the surrender state. Now, I haven't been aware, because I haven't done as much EFT and been around it as much, is there as much of a practitioner function, or is it just more of just the tapping, or is the practitioner actually their presence having a deeper effect when a person just does their own tapping on themselves?
That is a very interesting question, Richard, and I'm glad you asked that, because I think what research would suggest to me is that a lot of it is really mechanical. Like, you'll watch somebody who doesn't believe in EFT tapping on somebody who doesn't believe in EFT.
Right.
That's called not the placebo effect, but the nocebo effect. I don't believe it. I'm the therapist. I don't believe it. My client doesn't believe it.
Yes.
And EFT still works. So we've seen this in research over and over and over again. In one tapping study in Rwanda, with people who've been traumatized by the genocide in Rwanda, they gave the volunteers only 1 day of training in another tapping technique called thought field therapy, or TFT. So again, very, very minimal training, and they still got great results with these heavily traumatized people. So just the tapping without any kind of belief on the part of either the practitioner or the person does work. So mechanically, when you tap on these acupressure points like this in EFT, just the tapping by itself produces an effect independent of belief or therapist quality or anything like that. Because really bad therapists can get good results with EFT.
Because we've seen people
but the next level,
go ahead.
That's for the simple things.
Right.
For the next level of healing, for complex cases, for real powerful transformation, absolutely. The quality of energy the therapist brings to it, the degree of their training, their sensitivity, their ability to enfold the person, to bring the person into a healing space. In one study, they looked at heart rate variability, and they found that the heart rate variability of the practitioner entrained the client. So the client's coming into this heart energy field of the practitioners, and then coming to that has this healing effect on them. So there are field effects, and if you have a highly evolved, highly experienced, and powerful practitioner, I think you can do far more than just mechanical means can do.
Have people experimented with long-distance tapping?
They have. There's a paper by my friend and colleague David Feinstein, and I really was against him writing this paper because it just seemed too woo-woo to me.
Yes.
But it's called The Curious Case of Surrogate Tapping. And he put a request out on a whole bunch of bulletin boards for people who've done surrogate tapping for a distant relative who was sick, tapping for a child that was sick and couldn't tap themselves, tapping for an animal or a pet or something. And he compiled a bunch of cases like this, and they showed all kinds of improvements on surrogate work. So yeah. It is, something's going on there. Now, the mechanisms we don't understand. How on earth can me tapping
Well,
here?
that's my field.
Yeah. Tell me.
I can talk more about that side of it. About 5 years ago, a friend of mine was saying, hey, I bet you can adjust that person's, excuse me, the pelvic torsion when the hips are twisted, with a light touch. And so I was going to demonstrate on a friend. And he said, I bet you can do that without touching. I go, really? So I tried it, and I knew how to do it with heart energy. And the person just untwisted in a couple seconds without touching. And then I thought, wait a second. If I can do this, what else can I do? Now, I had been doing distant healing with quantum touch for years before that. But I never thought that I could actually see it happening in real time. Then when I gave a keynote address at the University of Hong Kong, there were about 17 people on stage, and I did it out loud where I said, okay, now I'm just looking at everybody. Now I'm merging everybody into one iconic person, and now I'm going to do the session, which took about 4 or 5 seconds, and I untwisted the sphenoid bone, put it back into alignment in my mind, and they measured every single person, and everyone had the pelvic torsion changed. So what we've seen is, of course, you don't have to believe in the stuff I wrote in my first book. You don't have to believe in the ocean to get wet, but you got to jump in. Yeah. So we've seen people who have, negative beliefs be shocked, and that's one of the fun things for me is seeing people just like my co-author Chris Duffield. He was taking the class and he's working on somebody and he's working on a man who had some bad sinus pain since he was a teenager. And Chris is meditating on that problem. There's no touch here. And the man stops him after 2 minutes and said, oh my God, he said, I felt a loud snapping noise inside my face and now I can breathe properly as the bone goes back. And Chris had his jaw open throughout most of the class because he's the scientist. And just to see these things happening all around him and as an effect of himself. Yes, we can do these things whether you believe in it or not. But the point I was making earlier was that when a person is coming from the deepest heartfelt space, now the heart math people have documented the electromagnetic field around the heart, and they make this whole case about it being electromagnetic. And I'd say, well, that's just not making any sense to me. Because electromagnetism, like light, falls off inversely to the distance of the source. Well, what we're doing doesn't fall off at all. It's like saying, I love you so much, but only when you're touching me.
Right.
You get 5 feet away and do I know you? Put them on the other side of the world. We're total strangers. So it's not an electromagnetic thing. Now, there may be a shadow of the spiritual metaphysical energy called the electromagnetic field, the physical thing we measure. But we are beings of love that are spiritually connected to one another. And even though we can't put that in a mathematical formula or weigh it or measure it, which drives the materialist absolutely crazy, it is what we are. And demonstrate it in seconds in front of a group of people if you want to see something visible, like untwisting pelvic torsion.
Well, we can't measure it, but what we can measure, and this is what dawned on me about 5 years ago, and I began to actually measure it, we can measure the physiological effects in the body.
I fully
agree.
agree.
For example, there have been several EEG studies with people hooked up to EEG electrodes measuring their brain states. And after tapping or even after other kinds of energy healing, they have marked differences in their brain states. And then I did this really well-known study of cortisol, where I took almost 100 people, randomized into 3 groups. One group got one hour EFT session, one got a 1 hour psychotherapy session, and one got rest, just resting for an hour. And we compared their levels of anxiety, depression, and cortisol. Now, cortisol is easy to measure, and it's your main stress hormone. It's the precursor of many other hormones and other kinds of neurotransmitters and proteins. And so it's a master hormone. It affects a lot of things in the body. It's the center of a lot of metabolic changes in the body. And what we found was that in the group that got EFT, anxiety and depression, so psychological symptoms, dropped by more than double the other 2 groups. But cortisol declined an astonishing average of 24% in 1 hour. Massive drop. So, no, can I measure the energy fields? No. Can I measure science, absolutely.
Yeah,
And when we measure those things, when you measure things like joint degree of joint rotation, when
exactly.
you measure things like cortisol, when you measure things like EEG, the relative levels of various brain waves, you measure those. And we're now, the exciting thing is we're now using these hard science measures to validate the soft science of energy healing.
That's exactly what I meant when I said we can measure. We can measure the impact of the energy. We can't measure the energy because that's metaphysical. That's not going to fit into the materialist perspective of reality. But yeah, exactly as you say, the cortisol, the EEG, and so forth. When I visited Dr. Norman Shealy, he wanted to see if I could affect people's EEG at a distance, and I got the most dramatic results he had ever seen from any of the healers who had come through. So he started calling me names like world-class healer. And I said, Norm, this is a basic human skill. This is something everybody can do. And he said, well, you're being too modest, or else you have the healthiest ego of any healer I've ever met. Well, it turned out that his secretary, his accountant, and his nurses could all do it too.
Wow.
So, Norm, what a coincidence. All your staff happen to be world-class healers, you know? So, yes, this is such an important point. We can't measure the love that we feel, but it's a real force that can affect the outer world that we can measure. We can measure the effect of the energy, but we can't measure the energy itself. Now, that
Yes.
bridge
Yes.
has been the taboo. That's
Well, we can't measure it yet, Richard, but we will measure it eventually. The guy who, you mentioned the field of the heart. So the heart has this very strong electromagnetic field. It extends about 15 feet away from the body.
Right.
The heart map people have measured it. Was measured actually much earlier. But the story of the guy who measured the heart's field is very interesting. He was a Dutch doctor called Willem Einthoven. And in the 1800s, in like 1880, 1890, he was obsessed with the degree of belief that the heart had its own energy field. Now, nobody else believed him at the time. He was met with complete disbelief and skepticism because no one had ever mentioned this before.
right.
So here's how it works. The old belief is, I'll see it when I believe it. But that's
Yes.
totally backwards.
Exactly.
You will, when you believe it strongly enough, you will see it. So Willem Einthoven built a galvanometer. There was the most sensitive galvanometer ever built to try and measure the heart's field. And he set it up. He measured someone's heart's field, and he failed. He couldn't detect the heart's field. So rather than agreeing with all his critics and saying, it's a pipe dream, the heart has no field, he said, I'm going to build a more sensitive galvanometer. So he did it again. He built a more sensitive galvanometer, tried to measure the heart's field, and failed again. He built more and more and more sensitive galvanometers, determined to find the heart's field. Well, eventually, he built one sensitive enough, and he measured the heart's field for the first time. This was in 1903. He measured it for the first time. He won the Nobel Prize in 1924. The same year, Hans Berger did the first successful measurements of the brain's fields. So we can't see or measure these fields yet, but we know they're there. We know they're having an effect on our physiology and our bodies. Will science catch up eventually? Yes. Should you not believe it because you can't see it right now? No way. There's all this evidence for it. Accept the evidence and just give the poor guys who are building the instruments enough years to catch up and measure all this stuff. And eventually we will. By the time we do, we'll have 18 other phenomena we can't understand or measure to worry about. So it's a cycle in science, and science is always lagging in its ability to measure things. But that doesn't mean they're out there. They're there. It just takes us a while to figure out how to find them.
Philosophically, I'm going to take a point of disagreement with you here, because I believe that which is physical, and that which is metaphysical will not move a needle. Now, yes, you can measure the changes on the chemicals, and I have tourmalines like this one here that developed massive color that was completely, it's become translucent now. I've seen it work on all infants and animals and people under general anesthesia and plants and fluids, all kinds of stuff. But I personally am holding the belief, and I could be wrong, but I really think, I feel very strongly about this, that our spirituality of who and what we really are is infinite. And we appear to be these meat machines that are functional, and we have these biological chemistries, and we are an interface between who and what we really are as spiritual beings and the meat machine that's breaking down and digesting and doing all this function. I think that the core essence of our nature is this spirituality. And I think the spirituality has a bridge that goes between us and the meat. And in that bridge, the love is actually a real force that changes the outer reality. But the love is on the side of the spirituality. And I don't think there's ever going to be, no matter how sensitive the equipment is, I don't think they'll ever build that bridge between the two. Because even the Curlian photography and the other things, that's not it. That's still measuring the meat machine. And so I think that, just from my own perspective, and like I said, I could be wrong, I don't think we're ever going to cross that bridge, because there's also spiritually a bridge of belief that people need to cross. So right now, our scientists, and which are the modern priests of our culture, wearing their white lab robes and telling us what lightning is and what the reality is, they're the priests of our culture. And they don't want to cross that bridge. And so everything has to be material. And the addiction to materiality is so deep. And that's why I love Rupert Sheldrake's most recent book, Science Set Free, because he goes into incredible detail on how the addiction to materialism has tainted all our perspectives.
I'll tell you a story. Something happened while you were talking. Here in the room I am now.
Yes.
So before we began, you and I were checking our microphones to get the best possible sound quality.
Right.
And I told you that I was doing the interview in my home rather than my office, because a bunch of people in the office, it's noisy. I wanted to really be able to focus and be here for the interview.
Right.
So so I'm here in my home rather than in my office. And we got the whole sound set up. We began this call now, okay. And while you were just talking, two things happened. One is that suddenly this tone sounded on my computer, and this warning flash that said, "Warning, you are now running on reserve battery power. You only have 2% left of your battery life." Okay? This is like, while you were talking, this is the last conversation, okay? Then the tone sounded, then someone happened to walk in the door, and it turned out it was somebody returning a power cord for my partner Christine's computer. So while you were talking, I waved at them. They're about to put it down on the table next door. I waved at them. They plugged it into the wall, and they plugged it into my computer. Now I'm going to tell you that might seem like, to the rationalist, like this, it's just coincidence that this person who borrowed this power cord happened to walk in at that moment, just after my battery went on. But I got to tell you, for you and me, and for many people like us, that's synchronicity. Synchronicity becomes the norm rather than the exception. We know that things will simply manifest all over us. And you know that when you're in alignment with that great universal flow of meaning and life and love, that you are in alignment with everyone else is in alignment with that great universal flow of meaning and life and love. And so all over the place, things just happen miraculously. And you start to bring synchronicity into your actual set of beliefs about the way that the world is. You're actually surprised if things don't function synchronicity. So I can't explain the mechanisms, but I know that when you're in tune, when you meditate, when you do the energy work, when you love, when you center yourself in your life purpose, just absolute miracles happen, and I've seen them happen. I just expect them all the time, and they just are they're built into my set of assumptions about the way the world works. And can I explain the mechanisms there? Absolutely no way.
No.
Do I believe it works? Do I see it every day? It's an assumption.
A spiritual teacher I worked with for many years would say, when synchronicities are present, the miracles are close at hand. So when you start seeing things just coming together and they're all working, and means you're operating with ease, and ease, in my understanding, is the mark of spiritual growth. When you're functioning with ease, it means, oh, you're on track within yourself. And then the synchronicities, and then the miracles. And by the way, a functional definition of a miracle is when things happen that exceed your expectations. So it could be a very large or small miracle, but when it totally exceeds your expectations, that's the miracle.
Yeah, and you get to look for them and you get to experience them. You give thanks for them. When you just give thanks for everything in your life, whether they're big miracles like massive manifestations,
Yes.
Or whether they're small miracles like the power cord, you just say, thank you, Great Spirit. I'll do my part, and then you trust the universe is doing its part. Some things maybe don't work out as well as you'd hope, or don't work out in the time frame you'd hope. Then you just give thanks anyway. Just give thanks to the way things are. When you give thanks to the way things are, you reduce a major cause of stress in your body and in your life. So suddenly you're just saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I accept things the way they are. EFT does that. EFT has you tap, exactly. And the basic routine is to tap over here and say, even though this terrible problem happened, I was tapping with a veteran early today,
right,
who was in Vietnam and had terrible PTSD. And I don't want to disclose what he was tapping on, but it was horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. And you give such thanks, and you tap, just say, the horrible thing happened, it was really bad, and I completely, deeply accept myself. You accept the world the way it is, accept yourself the way it is, and that acceptance, suddenly your stress level about, I wish the world were different, I wish my wife, my husband, my job, my money, my house, my kids were different, that stress then goes way down, and you start to feel that ease and that flow. So you can cultivate that ease by reducing your stress level and accepting things the way they are. Giving thanks is a really fast way to do that.
Absolutely. Now, Dawson, I've been wanting to ask you this question for a long time. Has anybody ever tested tapping without the affirmations?
Yeah.
Because I really believe that totally and completely accepting myself, even though I have this thing, I'm still accepting myself, is a massive healing outside of itself. So if a person just was like holding themselves and rocking and said, even though I have this thing, I totally completely accept myself, that would have a major impact by itself. And I'm wanting to know how much is the tapping and how much is the acceptance of oneself, because that's crucial to the healing process.
Yeah. Well, actually, a graduate student at a university in England just did a graduate thesis and asked that very question experimentally, did a randomized controlled trial of positive and negative emotions and used EFT with the gratitude statement and the tapping, and then compared it to the EFT without those things. And they found that there was a significantly better result if you use the tapping and the gratitude statement than if you didn't use them. So we're now, those are called dismantling studies, where you try to determine what components of a treatment are having an effect. And so for that first piece of research, that indicates that the affirmations and the tapping has a much bigger effect than the control, which is mindfulness. They were doing similar kinds of processing as we do in the EFT, but using mindfulness rather than the tapping and statement, and it didn't have quite as good as an effect.
I totally believe that that's the case. It took me 30 years to develop a technique we now call self-created health, where I've developed a very elegant system to help people find the exact emotional cause of the physical illness. And I've done many workshops. We have about 25 or 30 instructors now around the world teaching workshops. And it's better than 99% of the time. We can zero in on it, and it's not paint by numbers. It's not saying, well, knee pain means brothers and sisters or anything. We figure it out individually each time, so it's a total fit. Everything about the condition paints a holographic picture of an emotional set you didn't want to experience. So what happens is people go into a bit of a detailed process, but they get to express the emotions they never got to express. Then they get to bring in the emotional resolution of it, and then they find that there was a part of them that had chosen this reality. And that's like deep responsibility. Wow, I chose to have this happen. Yeah, you did, dude. You know, this is your reality creation. And then they go into a place of like feeling like nearly unforgivable because the bow's pulled back so far. Now, the standard viewpoint would be, how dare you blame them for getting sick? How dare you tell them to take responsibility for themselves? But actually, when they get themselves to that place where they feel this really deep remorse, yeah, I see. Okay, when I felt rejected, how did I treat myself? Oh, I totally rejected myself. I stopped loving myself entirely when I felt rejected. I want him to treat me or her to treat me in a way that I won't treat myself. Wow, I've been hurting myself all this time. I'm doing this to me. And when people get to that core place, then when they bring in the forgiveness, it's explosive self-love that goes over the top, and not only do symptoms disappear, but people feel grateful for having had the condition. But what I've seen has been really dangerous is when people jump to self-responsibility. That's step 3 in the process. Step 1 is the discovery. What is this all about? What is this knee pain or back or headache or whatever it is, cancer? It doesn't matter what the name of the condition is. The first is knowing what it is, and the second is the intense release process. Because if you jump those first two steps, it's kind of like trying to swallow a pill the size of a basketball to realize you did this to yourself. You just can't take it in because you have so much emotion that goes to the other. And then the healing process goes so deep. Now, when the quantum touch work doesn't get the results we want, then I say, all right, let's pull out the bigger guns, and the big guns is the emotional cause.
Yes.
Because if I can't get it done with this light tool, I'll just put my hands on, send the energy, and if it isn't working, okay, then we'll go to the emotional causative level and get it there. Now, a question I've been having is like, I think you told me once before that you saw that people with like PTSD would get a lot of benefit from the first like 5 or 8 sessions of EFT, but then they kind of like had like a diminishing return after a point. Is that what you said, or did I hear that wrong?
We did a randomized controlled trial of veterans of PTSD. It was a big trial, 59 veterans, half of them got EFT, half of them got a wait list then EFT, and they got 6 sessions of EFT, and 86% of them got better, recovered from PTSD, 14% did not. And they got better, but they were below the threshold of PTSD, but they still had some symptoms. And I do feel as though what I found with EFT is that EFT is really good for the superficial level of trauma. People take a 1-day workshop, 2-day workshop, 4-day workshop,
Right.
and they really, their levels of anxiety and depression on average decrease by 45% in 1 day.
Yeah.
Big drops. And there are parts of personal growth like that. You want to become more punctual. You want to procrastinate less. Maybe there are easier targets that you can address with EFT, with any kind of technique. But then there are those personality structures that are really entrenched, ingrained. And again, we know from the science of neural plasticity that if you pass a signal through a neural bundle over and over again for an hour, you can double the number of neural connections. So they've spent 40 years building out this neural circuit. There are some things which are so entrenched in their behavioral their neural network that they're very hard to shift. And so, there are those things that it takes a skilled practitioner to do. That's why we recommend that people train in a variety of modalities, not just EFT, and that the best practitioners can help people get to those deeper levels. But like for me, I was working on a book the other day, and I had an experience where I went to a family reunion of my ex-wife's family. And I found myself really triggered by some of the people there. And she and I got divorced almost 20 years ago, and yet I'm still triggered by people I haven't seen for 20 years or more.
Wow.
And so I've been doing this work for so many years. It doesn't mean I'm totally done. I work on.
We're never done.
No, I'm still getting triggered.
Yes.
So there are those, and I take a hard look and say, why was I triggered? What was it about those experiences that was so bad? So there are just layers, Richard. They're easy ones to fix, and then there are ones which just take persistence, and I think that's fine. I think that wanting everything to be that easy is it's great if you have that approach, everything with that mindset that this could easily shift, and yet there are just entrenched things in your behavioral set that might take you a while, and loving and accepting yourself, whether they're easy and quick or they're long and hard. Just love yourself either way. Love yourself and you've basically solved most of the problems, regardless of whether you heal or not.
This is exactly what I like to in my approach, is that we neither want to exaggerate nor underplay what goes on. We don't want to say that it's 100%, or we don't want to exaggerate anything. We want to tell the truth straight down the line, and not every approach is going to work every time. We see the low-hanging fruit where it's just a miracle, and then there's the times that you got to pull out the heavier guns and really go down and into the trenches and deal with the deeper issues. But it all works synergistically together. And that's why I feel so strongly that even though some people might look and say, well, here's the guy handling the EFT organization and you got the quantum touch organization. Aren't you guys competitors? I said, what are you talking about? We're here to help heal the world. Right. How dare you take some, have some people that you're helping, it's like, it's silly. It's ridiculous. And there was actually some clown out there who's kind of well known who says, don't study anything but mine, and I've been given the channeled information, and I'm the only one who can give it to you. And it's like, that's really sad. That's so old school. That I'm
actually, it's dangerous. What I say to people, if you hear anyone claim that their technique is the only one you need, don't walk away, run, because that's just delusionary. We need a variety of techniques, and there's no one size fits all in healing.
Well, we're still discovering, if we're not in a process of discovery and transforming, and then at some point it might be fun to kind of explore, hey, I wonder how EFT was going to work with, the quantum touch stuff, and we could, run some tests on certain things, because it turns out that when people run the heart energy, as I talk about in my new book, The New Human, Discovering and Becoming, we find out we have these wide range of abilities, like working across time and space, working on multiple people at once, working on multiple conditions at once, working inside brain structures, working anywhere you can imagine, going very specific. I mean, if I want to work on the anterior superior portion of the pineal gland, I can go right there, because we can now zero in with consciousness that if I want to work on somebody in Hong Kong, our higher self knows exactly who it is, exactly where they are. And I mentioned this before, but I met this physicist at a party recently. Actually, these people wanted to check out my work. And he was saying, well, I think the reason your thing works is because you're sending biophotons. I said, well, if I'm sending biophotons to somebody in Hong Kong, how does it get there? I mean, like, the world's round and the photons. He said, well, actually, all the photons are connected to every part of the universe. He's talking about a 60 billion light year universe that, cat knocked something over. Excuse me a sec. Let me get some up here. I got a little bit of light coming through the house, so I kind of cleaned up. This is Enzo, by the way.
Oh, you have two cats there.
Yeah, I got two cats. He's wonderful. And so he says, yeah, the biophotons are already connected to every part of the universe simultaneously. And I said, come on, dude. You're making this up, right? You're making this up as you go along. I said, to any physicist to any physician or chemist or biologist, this is going to look like psychic phenomena. He said, well, okay, I'll grant you that. But he was telling me that in order to measure the stuff, he'd have to put me in a chamber that would kill me. In order to be absolutely certain that it wasn't something that he could discount and say, oh, it's just a physical phenomenon, I'm absolutely certain of that. In order to prove it to himself, to his satisfaction, he'd have to kill me. In order to say that I wasn't emitting, Faraday cage wasn't good enough, nothing would be good enough except to put me in some kind of chamber so that nothing could come through. But anyway, it was pretty intense.
Well, actually, my friend Dean Radin at Noetic Sciences, they have what's called a Faraday cage there.
Yes.
And in the Faraday cage, nothing can come through. It's a shielded room. No electromagnetic radiation can come through, no UV radiation, nothing. It's designed to be a completely...
I've seen it.
Yeah, and even the cables, like if they hook someone up in the Faraday cage to someone else, to instruments outside, all those cables going in, there are optic cables. They're not electrical cables. So even there, they eliminate the possibility of wires conducting stuff. And even there, for example, I did a study on cancer with the person outside of the room sending loving intentions to their partner with cancer inside the Faraday cage.
Yeah.
And at the moment they sent intentions, so at random times, the intender would be told, send the loving intention. They'd send the loving intention at these random intervals, and at that very moment, the person inside the Faraday cage would record a change in their galvanic skin response, heart rate variability, and a whole bunch of other physiological signals. So no possibility of any known radiation being the intermediary, and yet there was still a bond. So, explain that away. It's like,
well, this is why
seriously messes with your notions of causality in time and space.
Well, that's the whole thing. This is the big paradigm change, is that as long as the materialists insist that everything is going to have a physical mechanism that they understand, then they will never accept things that don't have physical mechanism. It's very direct. And that's why I came up with an idea for a new Turing test. Now, for those who don't know, Alan Turing in 1950 conceived of a thought experiment. He was the man who conceived of the modern day computer. And he thought one day computers are going to be so clever, the programs are going to be so sophisticated, you don't know if you're talking to a machine or a person with a keyboard in the next room. And every year they actually have Turing tests where they have keyboards set up, and some of them are computer programs and some of them are people, and people always know. You say something like, oh, I'm so upset, my neighbor has an atomic bomb and I've always wanted one, I don't have one. And, oh, has that bothered you long? And you're not talking to a real person at that point. Well, I came up with a new idea for a Turing test, and it's really, really, really simple. If you can adjust the pelvic torsion of another person in the next room, it's a person. And if you can't, it's a smart toaster. Because ultimately, our love is a part of our spiritual essence of what we are as a being. And you can't mimic it. And that's why, part of the reason I don't think that the machines are ever going to be able to measure that energetic that comes off us. It's up for debate, of course, but that's my opinion. I'm sticking to it at the moment. But that we are these spiritual beings of love and connectivity. And the reason I think we can work on anybody in the world is because it's a spiritual phenomenon, not a mechanistic one. And it makes no sense. And of course Dean Radin's going to see that coming through, because the walls don't stop the love, because the physical may be the illusion and the love may be the reality. It's all backwards.
Yes. And when you get into the love deeply, you more and more suspect that. I know that when you immerse yourself in love, it just seems to multiply, and you have the sense of living in a cosmos full of love. And it's an extraordinary experience when you meditate and open yourself to that awareness of living in this infinitely benevolent, loving universe. You have a felt sense of it. It's not something you can argue with. There's this old Hermetic saying that to the person who has had the experience, no explanation is necessary. The person who has not had the experience, no explanation is possible. And when you sit in meditation, when you do this energy work, and you shift into that state of oneness with all that is, you have a felt sense that no one can talk you out of or into. You are just there. You're experiencing that. My more recent work, by the way, I've been doing EFT workshops now and research for about 10 years. But EFT is kind of launched now. We're getting into the Veterans Administration. We're getting into more and more hospitals. Thousands of people are learning EFT. So I don't have to it's not like a little sprout I have to nurture as carefully. A lot of other people are picking up the work and doing it.
Yes.
So what I'm now doing is I'm doing a new workshop called WEL, or Whole Energy Lifestyle. And in the WEL workshops, I'm doing some QT. I talked to you about this earlier, yes, about doing some of the exercises in your book.
Right.
Because the exercises in your book they're the quickest and most powerful way of shifting people into an awareness of their own heart energy and its healing power I've ever come across, Richard. They're brilliant. They are so good. I'm going to say that they're remarkable in that ability. But you do that, you do the tapping to release emotional trauma, you do those QT exercises to cultivate energy, and then to show how it can be used to love another person and also love any unhealed part of your body. And what you then do is you start to open yourself to that universal flow and invite in and cultivate a relationship with that love, that great spirit, that infinite part of you. And when you do that, and that starts to flow into you and flow out of you in expression in your words, your voice, your skin, your body, your cells, your energy field, then suddenly you become this vibrant being, not only living as a human being full of love, but living as a human being full of love in an energy field full of love, in a planet full of love, in coordination, in synchrony with every other being on that planet who's also full of love. So you find all kinds of things simply happen easily, effortlessly, naturally, synchronistically, that just are part of this grand dance. It's like being part of nature. Nature just unfolds effortlessly this way. But you can be part of this great symphony of love happening. And in these workshops, it's amazing. We have people suddenly reporting that they've had miraculous cures, that they are seeing energy for the first time, that they're leaping to states of consciousness they'd only dreamed of before, they're having lucid dreams, all kinds of amazing psychic shifts. But when you start to cultivate that presence and say, here I am, I'm open, I acknowledge that the purpose of this physical body is to be a vehicle and to express and experience that greater reality, then that greater reality begins to work through you, move through you, heal through you. And the things that happen then that's when the major miracles can occur.
It's so true, because when people are connecting to who and what they really are, and they open up to that love, then it opens the door to all the miracles. Now, we're really hitting a point where the world is going to have to make some big decisions. Whether or not we're going to stick to the materialistic philosophy, which is all about getting more stuff, more possessions, more material things, whether we want to share with one another, or we want to just continue going toward the brick wall as we hit the gas pedal, going faster and faster. And the question is whether we will cross the ecological tipping points before we make the decisions culturally and spiritually as a humanity to come together, because that's really what the big question is going to be.
I'm convinced we will. I have no doubt at all, not even 1% doubt, we'll make that shift and we'll make that leap. I'm certain of that because we have tools now, like these energy healing modalities. They've been around for millennia, but now they're becoming so prevalent. They're becoming part of what anyone can do. So they collectively are going to produce a huge shift in human awareness, a huge reduction in human suffering, and then those less suffering humans will make collective decisions and have a collective mind change that we would never have had we remained trapped in suffering. So when we're releasing that suffering individually, when we're doing it collectively, we have access to ways of seeing the world, to worldviews, to consciousness, to creativity we never had before. And we now have just millions of people worldwide waking up. And that puts humankind on a whole new trajectory where consciousness, awareness is interacting with evolution. It's never happened before in the same way. No. So now we have consciousness and evolution just interacting in this beautiful dance. And I think we'll solve many of those problems and see a huge shift in the few years to come.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that, because the trajectory we had been going in is obviously not where we want to go. Yeah, it's definitely in that direction. And we need to wake up and come together. And that's why I think that what we're doing is, as well as thousands and thousands of other people bringing brilliant stuff to the world, is really where it has to go. There's just no other way. Be the change, essentially, that we want to see.
There is no other way. You're right. I mean, the other options are all dead ends. This is the only way we can go. So we have to go up.
Well, you told me that you had got into a university that was interested in the research, the like 50 studies, whatever you presented, and they got very excited about it. And we're planning to continue the research. And then I think you said somebody took the position that the other man had had and said, we're not interested in this at all.
Yes. So there have been several false starts like that where we've had, in fact, we've had probably 3 false starts for every mile we've taken.
Right.
So, like, for example, right now at Walter Reed Military Hospital in Washington, in Bethesda, Maryland, in one ward, there's a psychiatrist using EFT. In the next ward, there's a psychiatrist trained in EFT who's forbidden to use it by their supervisor. So one supervisor says, use it. Right next door, you can't use it. So we're in this weird place. But, like, you know, I've been trying, for example, for 2 years, to get a letter sent to the Secretary of State for Veterans Affairs by a congressman. And I've had all these, again, false starts with this congressman, that congressman saying they would do it, then not doing it.
Right.
But, you know, you just keep on moving. And eventually, like last month, one congressman did send the letter. So you keep on moving, you keep on believing, and as you believe it, you will see it. It will manifest. It may not be in the time frame you'd hoped for, it may not be in the way you expect it, but keep on believing it, keeping that sense of positivity, of hopefulness, of being on an upward spiral, and engage yourself in that fully, then huge things become possible. So yeah, there are those setbacks and problems where you're supposed to do something. I was supposed to speak, for example, at a veterans hospital last month, and the 2 days before I got there to give my lecture, it turned out that the department head responsible for emailing all the staff to come to the lecture forgot to send the email to all the staff. You know, so I was there.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are all these things where you get denied, slapped down. People are skeptical. People belittle you. Look at Wikipedia right now. There's a big controversy in Wikipedia because the skeptics have owned all of the alternative medicine entries in Wikipedia. They call it pseudoscience, and so
yeah, they took down mine. They've rewritten Rupert Sheldrake's biography.
Yes.
Just recently, and and I just came across the information today. I haven't validated it yet, but it looked like somebody that Monsanto executive is up for a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing out wonderful food to the world for their GMO contributions. I haven't researched it to see if it's actually true, but that's what I read. And people are saying, yeah, it really is true, that Monsanto's up for the Nobel Prize for their food contributions. So it's kind of an upside-down, crazy world. Now, I've only been in this field for 38 years. So I figure any decade now, you know, we're going to go mainstream, and people are going to realize that love and healing is real. And but we're still up against
us. We've hit the tipping point. We've passed it. We're now on the easy downslope of the mountain. I believe the tipping point happened maybe 2 years ago. When I speak at a lot of medical conferences, psychology conferences, I do professional seminars for doctors and nurses and therapists, and really the stuff we're doing, I'm talking about, I don't get any kind of opposition to it. I don't get any kind of negative feedback. People love that we're offering these therapies. They may not understand them fully, but they know there's something there. Well, so I think we're past the tipping point.
You've created a preponderance of evidence, and you're going to give me some forms that our people can start filling out and start gathering some data and start putting together the evidence. And I'm looking forward to that because we
and I really encourage
well.
The QT and other similar therapies. When I did the EFT research, I did it very deliberately in a sort of stair-step manner in templates. So you can grab one of those templates and apply it to QT or any other energy therapy, and then quickly validate your therapy. So it doesn't take you 10 years, it can take you 2 years or 3 years if you just follow those same steps that I did with EFT. So I was very conscious of the fact that I was doing this with EFT as a template for any other energy therapy to grab onto and replicate.
I love it. I think that's fantastic. I've had a lot of encounters recently with people suffering from ODD.
Yeah.
That's the obsessive debunking disorder. And feeling the need to say, if it doesn't fit my beliefs, it can't possibly be true. If it doesn't have that material explanation, it can't possibly be real. And there's a particular kind of blindness that holds people into that mindset that it just locks them up so that they can't consider the possibility that anything outside their field of vision could exist. Yes. But by and large, it seems that the universities are not that open. At least this has been my experience. It sounds like you're experiencing a more open invitation.
Well, I did a lot of the early research myself. I was, raising the money to fund it. I was physically collecting the data. I was doing the EFT. I was doing the whole thing with the occasional bit of volunteer help. But when you build enough of a mass of early data, then other people start to get interested, and so after a while, the momentum builds. But initially, yeah, you have to kind of push the thing along yourself, and it's a little hard. But once you publish the first 3 or 4 studies, even if they're highly flawed studies, even if they're far from methodologically perfect, you have some evidence. That's evidence that others can pick up and run with. So now we're doing, studies with over 100 people, randomized controlled trials done in universities. But it took doing those early, flawed, imperfect, methodologically weak studies to get to that point.
Yeah, you provide a preponderance of evidence that, hey, it looks like something's happening here consistently, and now let's study it in more detail.
Yes.
And see where it can go.
Yeah. I really encourage you to keep on with the process, because
we're going to do that now.
Yeah.
We've decided that we're going to take your lead, and I mean, we could have done this a decade ago or more, but we just didn't know to do it properly. But we have, thousands of people using it, so it's time to pick up and get the data.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, because we're now using these research techniques to validate these kinds of therapies, and it turns out that they are phenomenally powerful. You look at the data and you think, wow, what drug can do that? Nothing on the market. I mean, amazing results in these kinds of therapies. So they're showing that, as one doctor friend of mine said, if this were a drug, it would be medical malpractice to fail to prescribe it. They're that good. So get the evidence, and then it becomes mainstream.
And like you say, we don't know the limits of what, you think that, well, maybe we can't work on this condition. And then you find out, well, that worked too. And you're totally surprised. So it's one of the things that's really kept me going all these years is the just fascination discovering that we can do things that we just never even imagined. So I suspect that this is, as spiritual beings, that as long as we're looking for the limits, we're going the wrong direction. As long as we're exploring the unlimited nature of ourselves, then we're actually looking in the right place. So, like, for instance, I was working on somebody who, I was telling this guy at a gym, it happened to be Gold's gym, where Arnold had worked out in Venice. And I told him that I could help an athlete get stronger faster and recover faster. And he thought, well, that's crazy. So he said, okay, I'll bring in somebody and we can test it out. So the guy's doing these crunches, these sit-ups at a certain weight. And the guy, he says he can do 3 sets of 25. He does his first set of 25. I hadn't worked on him yet. Then while he's resting between sets, I'm running energy into his belly. He does his second set, and he does 50. The guy's looking at me, and so he rests, and I work on him again. He does the third set, and he does 50. The guy's looking at me. I said, how do you feel? He says, I can do another set. I said, okay. So I run energy. He does a third set, the fourth set, and the fourth set is 50. And I say, look, he's going back further, and he has better form. And the guy goes, I see that. And then, he's done 175 instead of 75. I said, how do you feel? He says, I don't feel like I worked out. So I had a piece of paper in my pocket, and I handed it to the trainer. He opens it and says, I don't feel like I worked out. Because I've heard this so many times. And he said, I've never done this much before. I reach in a different pocket, hand it to him, and it opens. He said, I've never done this much before. Then we got him on heavy squats, where he's lifting this heavy bar doing squats. And I do an experiment where I'm only working on one side of his thighs, quads. And after 2 sets, he says, please do the other side. Third pocket. Please do the other side, because you hear these things regularly. But what drives me crazy sometimes is knowing what an impossibly great solution we're sitting on, and it's like I'm not the big promoter person. I'm more of an introvert, in many ways. I don't just get out there that much, and nor do I have the degrees because I majored in draft evasion in college. I just found some good stuff and wrote about it and got classes going and got a lot of people excited. But I don't have the academic background, but I do appreciate those who do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, I just got my doctorate just to finish up the process, so I could publish the papers.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I just say that it's well worth doing because those stories are great, and then if you have the evidence from studies as well as the stories, you have a really good base in what people believe, which is the stories, and then what the medical establishment believes, which is the studies. So having both those things is powerful.
Yeah, they're both necessary, especially when you're helping a person make the shift from an old belief system into a new one. You need to give them some meat and potatoes, so to speak, to something to hold on to want to make that shift, something of substance.
Yeah.
To help them make that transition. Well, this has been fantastic. I really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything that you'd want to talk about that we haven't really discussed?
I need to run to another appointment, but we should do this again soon.
Yeah, this has been really good. I really appreciate it so much.
The other thing we should do the next time around is we should actually do a call and do one of your exercises on the call together at a distance where we are now.
That'd be fun. I like that idea. And maybe we can do a little EFT tapping. And
yes.
And I'll tell you, when people are projecting the heart energy, I mean, if that was combined, if we combined the QT2, because this isn't just enough to open it up, when you actually project it like we teach in the level 2 classes, and you can project it inside their brain or the tissues. And what some of my practitioners are finding now is that when people are going through, like say you had somebody with a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety, where do you feel it in your body? Well, it's here in my chest or it's in my gut. And that's where you project the energy into the physiological places where they're feeling the emotions. Wow, that just has been, the reports are that it just melts it away. So we're continuing to make these discoveries all the time.
Yeah, and of course all those traumas are stored in our bodies, so however you release them, they get then released from the muscles, from the tissues, from the body, and that's when real healing occurs, not trying to do it all from the head level.
And we also work inside the brain, and we find tremendous benefit working inside people's brains too. In fact, most of the deeper psychological issues that I've been told people worked on, the bipolar, the autism, the phobias, just the list goes on and on, the depressions, all that stuff, people have worked in the body where the person feels it in their body, because all emotions are felt body experience, and they work inside the brain, a lot inside the brain. So it's a whole nother avenue that we're finding a lot of success in. Yes. Anyway, it sounds like I have to let you go. You got something else you got to run to.
I do, but bless you, my friend, and let's make sure we do this again very, very soon.
I look forward to it.
Ditto.
Hey, have a great one.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.